Kicked off this series just this year, really as a way of sharing what's happening not only around Texas with all of the different smart cities initiatives, but also inviting other people from around the country and really from around the world, which is one of our featured speakers today, Jordan Davis. And I'll get into the introduction of Jordan in just a second, but really just wanted to appreciate you all logging in, spending your lunch hour with us. The Texas Smart Cities series really came out of the second Texas Smart Series Summit. We did two series 2 years in a row, and of course this year we're obviously very virtual, but the first couple of years of those series was just such an awesome opportunity to get everyone together in a room and truly understand what everyone's doing, and which is the perfect way to figure out how we share challenges, even though every single city and even our rural areas are very unique. But we can share resources, share approaches, share lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work. So that's the whole kind of ethos around this. It's just getting people together from all different sectors and learning from each other. So thanks for all of your attention to do that. So, here's the slide basically saying what we're doing. So it's my first time introducing this series. So thanks for hanging with me. So today we're going to welcome Jordan Davis, but also make sure that you have our future Smart City Series events on your calendar. On February 24th, we'll welcome Ruth B. Yesner, who's the Vice President of Government Insights for IDC. And then on March 10th, we're inviting Emily Yates, who's a Smart City Director of Philadelphia and Smart Philadelphia. Of course, on the 24th, we'll talk about AI for civic and traveler engagement with Steven Steinberg. So you can see just a real variety of folks and perspectives and topics. We're always going to keep this different. If you have ideas for things that you want to see, of course, just ping myself, Jay, or Jessica. So without further ado, I'm very privileged and pleased to introduce Jordan Davis, our speaker today, who's the director of Smart Columbus. And, I'm very happy to say that Jordan is not just a personal inspiration for me, but also someone that I'm lucky to call a friend. We've been on a lot of conference circuits together, a lot of stages, and one word that I would use to describe Jordan is tenacious. And whether you're talking about bringing communities together, implementing smart city strategies, or looking for the best dumpling in Seoul, South Korea, I have never seen anyone who is so successful in her endeavors. So Jordan's the director of Smart Columbus, obviously, and a lot of you, of course, will understand that Columbus was the city that run the U.S. Department of Transportation Smart Cities Challenge in 2016. Jordan, at the helm of that, has done such a beautiful job, not only of steering that community when seeing what you can do when you have some federal resources, but also understanding the challenges around some of those things and making sure that the community and the citizen and resident is always at the center of all of those decisions. So I think she'll share some of those approaches with us today. And without further ado, Jordan, take it away.
Thanks, Chelsea. Good to be with all of you. We always have, I think, a fun Austin-Columbus rivalry sparked from soccer. But I hope that it goes beyond in really productive ways, especially in the smart city space. We can learn a lot from you, and I hope you all can benefit from our learnings. And thanks, Chelsea, for the wonderful introduction. You're my new hype woman, I think.
I love that title. I'll take it.
Yeah, sitting inside all day makes you feel pretty good. But, I got a chance to come out to Austin most recently, actually, amidst the pandemic, which is kind of wild, my first time. But we do have so much in common. The location of a big university. Ours, we're home to the Ohio State University, also state capitals. Young talent, growing economy. We're the fastest growing economy in the Midwest for a region over 1 million people. So very similar learnings. I think we're a little bit behind you in the growth story. You've been growing a little bit longer than us, but I welcome questions as I go in the chat box. I'd rather this be a discussion than just a presentation. I can share with you what I have today, which is an overview of our portfolio from the Smart City Challenge. But we can go a lot of different directions. To give you before I dominate the screen with slides. To give you a perspective on where we are today, we won in 2016 the US Smart Cities Challenge, which therefore awarded our community 2 different grants. One, which was $40 million from the US Department of Transportation, $10 million from Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. The $10 million was dedicated fully to electric mobility, so climate change related objectives. The USDOT grant was related to emerging transportation technologies, predominantly in like connected and the autonomous space. Very much oriented in solving for equity, versus the electrification was really about spurring a market, that early adopter funnel. The effort on the electrification grant was completed in June of last year, and the USDOT grant concludes this June. And so we are nearing the end of that. We as a community have been undertaking a planning process for the past year or so on sustaining the platform of Smart Columbus, because we really saw the grant as a seed to a bigger opportunity for our community to think differently about how we solve community problems, particularly in how we're using technology in entrepreneurial approaches to community problems. So we can go a lot of different directions with this. So I wanted to be as valuable and insightful for you all in how you're thinking about your work in the smart city space. So with that, unless there's like burning questions to start, I'm going to put my chat box up here just so I have it. I'm going to dive right in. 1 second. All right, and so that I can jump around, I'm going to share it in this view. So I apologize for the not polished presentation overload, but if I get a question and you want to go somewhere else, I can do that based off your interest. So we talked a little bit about the winning of the US Smart Cities Challenge. Obviously, Austin was a part of that competition as well. And I believe, or at least I hope, your community's learnings at its core from that challenge and pitch competition experience in of itself is just as valuable as it was to us. Obviously, the winning has a whole lot of learnings, but that challenge process and going after that was equally as fruitful for our community. It exercised a muscle of collaboration. It quickly organized partners. We've been able to use that similar approach on other projects as well, between getting private sector investment to some hypotheticals, right? So we're going to win this. Here's what you can get. All of those types of conversations were really productive for us. And it was a great exercise for the community to think about the future and where we wanted to go. One of the biggest components of our application, as I referenced just a little bit, was the matching investment from the private sector. So we pursued the grant with a $90 million, what we call acceleration fund at the time of our application. And those dollars were made up of cash investment, but also aligned investment. So the Ohio State University, the utility, the state of Ohio made, multi-million-dollar aligned investments in new work that would be associated with this program, whether it was new research, new investments in grid modernization, et cetera. How many different vendors did you review and how did you balance that with core goals? Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big question. Yes. So that's where the 90 million came from. Today, we stand at around 720 million. That has really just spurred from having the conversation, having the kind of center of gravity for this work, and a community priority in this has cascaded into a lot of new investment by companies and regional municipalities outside of the city of Columbus as well. So our whole portfolio, because it was funded by the US Department of Transportation, is really oriented in transportation. So we think about it as a holistic portfolio of mobility specific innovation. And we're looking for each of these innovation or technologies to solve a specific use case in the community. And we really had the use case driven in the front of our application, and we tried to respect that resident voice throughout the development of the program. Today, this full comprehensive portfolio is live, deployed, or completed. So we've been able to fulfill all the commitments and getting them out into the world. And this is just what is grant funded or funded from these programs. There is a lot of associated and affiliated work that I'm not going to walk you through today, but if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. So we think of the future of mobility, and for those of you in the mobility space might think of it similarly as connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. We think those are the big innovation domains for how mobility is changing. And then the operating system and data, we believe, kind of connects that whole ecosystem. So we organized, in my mind, across regardless of where the money came from, you can think about our portfolio in this way. Supported by data. And so data really being the backbone of the program. This was one of the largest investments the city made in the USDOT with the USDOT dollars. Competitive RFP process to build an open source data management platform. The city ended up going with a local company called Pillar that, after this bid was awarded, was shortly acquired by Accenture, and they built this platform. So you can actually go to it at smartcolumbusos.com. I will share this in the chat to check it out, but it allows you to kind of dive into the data, visualize it, as well as export it. And it's built on all open source tools. We've been able to figure out how to stand it up in nearly 2 days with new developers because of the documentation. So it's really agile and nimble. And then the affordability was the primary purpose of developing it in open source. We get that question a lot. The reason why it was developed in open source was really to prove out a hypothesis that you or a city or a government may be able to get out of these locked in vendor relationships where they're upsold for constantly adding new software features. So this is, yes, it is still open source after the Accenture acquisition, correct. It is on GitHub. If anybody's interested, I can send that link as well. And so that was kind of the thesis and the hypothesis of why build it open source. And then a lot of the money was invested in building the platform, not necessarily in the data analytics. So one of the things we really learned from this in trying to bring the data in was just how disparate the data is around the ecosystem and the community. So our vision initially was to have this as a regional integrated data exchange. What we quickly started to realize was that not only does the city have disparate data, which we knew going in, but nonprofits and other public sector entities didn't have the data in an organized or structured way to really participate in sharing easily. They didn't have APIs set up for their data. Some people were tracking their data on Excel sheets and Word documents and all different things, that the work to just create regional governance of data that people followed is a whole undertaking that a regional planning commission has taken on. And so a lot of this investment was really building the tool and building the facilitator, and also demonstrating different data functionality. So there is a predictive analytics use case that's being worked on from the operating system to help with operational efficiencies in the right of way and a few other things. So I will follow up with the GitHub link for everyone. I saw that someone asked for that. So the first area is in connected. So I think all of you should know what connected vehicles technology is. Please let me know if not. We started with a broader vision for this deployment, but this has launched within COVID, and not a lot of people are driving. So the participation and resident participation has gone down from the initial expectations. But essentially, we have installed around I think it's 28 to 70 different intersections with the connected vehicle technology. And then we're getting about 600 residents to actually participate. And then the connected vehicle technology is also on city fleet vehicles and COTA buses. These vehicles traverse the roadways that are highlighted, which you have no context for, but these are urban environments. We also have a connected vehicle environment that's on an interstate highway just outside of the city core. And so a lot of the R&D with companies that's occurring is able to traverse both that interstate environment and the urban environment, which is adding to a lot of the learnings, and the interoperability between the two pilots has been really valuable for USDOT. But I think also a testament to that regional collaboration in that ecosystem. The connected parking aspect is an app. I'm sure you have a smart parking app in your community as well. What we have been piloting with Mobileye is more of a predictive parking. So you can know which parking is available and pre-reserve that parking when you're coming downtown. The thought is we can reduce congestion in key downtown areas, predominantly for visitor and large events. Obviously, this has launched amidst COVID, so our user data is minimal for really large in-person events, but we've built the solution in a way that's highly adopted by both the city government and their on-street parking, but also private parking owners, which is a big component of this, that the garages that are privately owned would also be in this. So you have kind of one app as a ghost, like a one-stop shop. On the autonomous side, we've actually done 2 autonomous shuttle pilots. We started the first one in 2018 through 2019 downtown. This is typically what you see in many communities, right? Like a tourism kind of baseline use case. Let's just see how the technology works. Let's trial it, get familiar with it, and kind of show an early win. And that really was a use case for teaching and learning, predominantly in the center of our downtown. We ran it for about 10 months, learned a lot from it. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share those learnings documents. But a lot of those learnings has then since informed our the pilot that's actually running right now, which is in a lower income neighborhood called Linden. This neighborhood, in particular, we're using this use case to connect a transit center, or transit mobility hub actually, with a food pantry and a community housing development. Because of COVID, this pilot has shifted to delivering meals to residents in the community, but it is the first that's a resident use case. So this doesn't get a lot of visitor traffic. The intent was not for high numbers, thousands of people to ride it. It was for us regular riders to see if this technology could solve for that first mile, last mile gap. And we've learned a lot, again, about these 2 different technologies, the speeds, the sensor types, the LiDAR use. One was a startup, one is kind of a white label technology solution. So very different in nature in a lot of ways, if anyone's interested in those. Shared mobility. So this is, something that's happening to every city. These are a lot of forces coming at cities. And so how are we managing that emergence of these new business models and new mobility modes? We, under the grant, the city led the creation of 6 mobility hubs, which were rooted along the bus rapid transit line. Again, all of this really under the philosophy that public transit becomes the backbone of the mobility ecosystem. So how do we connect these different options to your rider experience in using public transit? So when you can get off a bus station, that's where bike sharing is, scooter sharing, car share as well. And then furthermore, in those areas, there's also Wi-Fi available from the smart city kiosks that were at each of those bus stops. There then was an app that was developed by the city that was a multimodal trip planning app. So one of the things that you see in many of the trip planning solutions right now is it helps you get somewhere by one mode. So whether it's by scooter, here's a scooter close to you, take that all the way, take a bus all the way. But how might you plan a trip where you take a scooter to 2 bus stops down, so you only have one connection versus two, and then have a taxi picking you up at your departure stop so you can get to your appointment on time. So that app and that functionality has been in the market for a while, actually pre-COVID, and then the payment component was introduced late last year, and so that allows for people to exit the app, pay, and then bring you back into the app. So it's just like a window exit in the app experience. But participants in those are Lyft and Uber and all the like. There's also a mobility assistance app. So people with on the autism spectrum or some degree of dementia, this is an app that's customizable by the caretaker to allow people to more easily navigate public transportation. So it can be whether they take auditory cues or different types of visuals. It allows you to customize it for a different type of cognitive disabilities. And that has, in the end, helps reduce some of the paratransit demand and allows people to navigate transportation more independently. Just some of the things around this space that I think is notable. We have an accelerator partner program that I'm going to reference here, but we really have spent for the past 3 or 4 years pre-COVID on how do we change commuter culture, because we have a very high single occupant vehicle commute rate here, one of the highest in the country. And so we created an Ignite Action Fund to help stimulate private sector leaning in and changing the incentive structure for how people get to work. So creating micro transit solutions that the company was sponsoring to get residents from their home to work in shared kind of carpools, incentivizing electric bike purchasing, and then also just in general creating sustainable commutes, which I'll talk about in a minute. In alignment with the Ignite Action Fund, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, so our Regional Planning Commission and our Transit Authority and our Downtown Commission also led an effort to raise dues for all the downtown property managers. That has then resulted in providing free transit access to all downtown workers. So about 45,000 people now have access to free transit as a result of working downtown. And that actually benefits, white collar to blue collar workers, hourly to salary workers. And it's been a huge success and has increased ridership pre-pandemic by about 10% on the quota system. So a really great example of leaning in from the employer. So the last area is electrification. And this was funded through the philanthropic grant from Paul G. Allen's Family Foundation. And the objectives of this program were to really establish, to begin with, an electric vehicle market in the heart of the Midwest. We were a laggard before, and we were seeking to really become one of the fastest growing markets in a 3-year period, which not only hadn't been seen before, but frankly just wasn't possible at any other time in the history because the product wasn't available. The product was weird or wonky, or infrastructure and the role of the utility wasn't really clear in the past. So I think what we've demonstrated through this program is how ready the country is to adopt electric vehicles. And we think that the practices that we deployed in a market like Columbus and the messaging that we use to increase adoption will really help a lot of cities that have been behind the curve in offering incentives from the state. We're not a ZEV state in Ohio. I don't see state leadership here anytime soon providing substantial incentives to spur the market. So it's a good way to demonstrate how local leadership can contribute to making a more electrified transportation sector. So a part of this program, one of the more differentiator pieces was this accelerator partner program that I referenced before, which we engaged, 70 plus employers in this program. This is where that Ignite Action Fund and the employer benefits came from. But they also leaned in heavily in helping electrify the transportation sector, whether it was installing workplace charging, providing benefits for employees to transition to electric vehicles, transitioning their own fleets to electric vehicles and the like. And then just to give you a sampling, as I talked through kind of some of those key projects, there's a lot of other really interesting things happening in the region. And this is just really pre-COVID. I mean, if we could do a whole hour on smart city behaviors and projects that are taken on through the pandemic, that I think really is the future of this space and this work. But we do encourage you and would welcome any other questions or feedback. We've published a playbook, accelerateyourcity.com, where we've had a storyteller on site with us through the core, 3 years of the program, writing best practices and case studies for what we were doing and learning. One of the big responsibilities of the grant was that we didn't let the learning stay in our community, but try and get them to as many people as possible. So we hope we've lived up to those expectations, but would love thoughts on what was useful, what wasn't, what other things. And we're going to be learning a lot from the USDOT projects as data starts to come in over the next several months, and kind of closing up a lot of the research associated with that. So there'll be a lot of new, fresh content on there as well.
Jordan, I have a quick question, real quick, while you're while other people are kind of formulating their questions for you. So do you have, kind of like a, boy, if we would have known now what, or known then what we know now, what are recommendations for other cities in terms of like things that were super difficult or things that weren't as difficult as you thought they would have and could have gotten some quick wins quickly, or maybe that is already the case?
Yeah, I think one of the earliest things some fundamentals, I guess, in the program design was taking an agile approach. And while in the private sector, that seems very typical or common language, that is not the normal nomenclature. That's not the normal process of public service departments, transportation departments, especially in the federal government. Yeah. So developing a technology product versus thinking about roads and highways are very different. Mm-hmm. And it takes different people, different skill sets, and it takes an alignment with the approach with your grantor and your funder, that like what we think it's going to be could change. We're going to learn a lot along the way, and users are going to give feedback. And I don't think in true transparency ever got to a full agile approach because of the way that grants are written and expectations of committed outcomes. So there were a lot of things, while the intention was good to take user feedback and iterate and change things, that there was a lot of encumbered commitment because of the grant that didn't allow the grant team at the city to pivot and change to the degree that they might have liked to when they saw signals that this wasn't going to be as successful as they wanted to. So I think that that's a learning, not only in just grant management and making sure people are on the same page about that, but also for the broader space of smart cities and how we set expectations, these challenge competitions. How do we hold people accountable? If we want the community or civic sector and governments to think more like product-based managers and teams, that requires a different way of monitoring impact and success and expectations of delivery.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for the public sector folks on the call, and even some of the private sector folks, is just understanding the expectations of where the capital is coming from. And it's not always patient capital, it's encumbered. And so everybody kind of stating their expectations in the very beginning and being really honest about it, at least in my experience, that's what I've found to be helpful, but those aren't easy conversations to have. So
yeah. For sure, for sure. And I think in all of the terms in the smart city space, which all of you can probably attest to, have a lot of different definitions and a lot of different interpretations. And so we kind of live in this buzzword city. Um, and so really understanding what people mean by open data. What do people mean by data sharing? What do people mean by open source? Like all of these things that we say very interchangeably really mean very different things. So that came to light in different ways when we were procuring. So we had set out expectations in the RFP process that certain data would be shared. Then when you get into negotiations, there's a lot of ways to do that. And so there's a lot of nuance, I think, in this space that people are learning and becoming accustomed to. I think this space has evolved tremendously in 4 years. So where we were, even 3 years is, we're in a much better place collectively as cities and around the country. But those were a lot of really learnings and fail fast moments.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate how transparent you all were while you were going through that process. I mean, I think a lot of the evolution is due to your realness during all of that, and you kind of shared the pain in real time. So,
Mhm.
looking at some of the questions here, Jay, I'm just going from earliest, and then I'll scroll back up. Jay says, Jordan, what are top 3 learnings or projects a city could attack fairly quickly without many resources required? So I know you all had kind of the grant
Yeah.
to go with, but if you were kind of doing this and you didn't have that funding source, then what are kind of quick wins a city could do, or even foundational elements?
Great question. So I think there's a few things, and I wish we weren't as burdened with these external expectations to maybe have done some things a little faster. But I think there's a real opportunity for collaboration between government and startups that egg still hasn't been cracked. I think there's a lot of incentive for startups to want to pilot and prove out their business model on benevolent use cases, like as well as getting the government to be a customer. I think getting the government to be a customer is harder, but there's an opportunity for startups to find the city as a living laboratory and for government to really identify what the problems are and help bring that as an opportunity to the community. So a good example of that for us is we're working on an emerging smart farm project in a lower income neighborhood called Hilltop. And we're trying to really demonstrate the farm of tomorrow and make it a workforce development, teach data analytics, and bring different technologies to bear on this property. And we were able to put kind of an open call for innovation and invite some startups to deploy their technology to help with, kind of small device delivery, autonomous delivery from the farm to senior living facilities. And while that might not, dramatically change the delivery operations, it's a great way to inspire the community to think differently about the future. And that we think is as equally as valuable as actually deploying like a project at scale. If we can plant the seeds and expand people's minds, like minds don't shrink after they're exposed to things, right? So we think that that's really important, that this culture is changing. And I think government can be a facilitator for a lot of proof points of this new world and this new way of thinking that I think is really important. Other things I think in the shared mobility ecosystem are happening around cities, as well as the electrification and kind of green transportation movement are going to be happening to cities. So I think those are big policy opportunities and questions of priority. So even if it's not a budget investment, but I know Austin, you guys have done a commendable job in building out your protected bike infrastructure and making it really a really safe place for micro mobility. But I think we're gonna, yeah,
We're not there yet.
yeah, you're in the process. But I think those companies are going to be hurting after COVID. And so I think it's a big opportunity to think about. We prior to had subsidized docked bike sharing as cities. what does that mean? How do we embrace scooter sharing and other things? And really understanding, you just saw there's a bill to incentivize from a tax incentive for e-bikes. I think there's a real opportunity for cities to help fill out that ecosystem and make sure there's choice in the market, and not just expecting public transportation to move everybody around, especially in growing cities like Austin. It will not keep up with your growth and your transportation needs. So I think that's an opportunity. And then I think the electric mobility space is huge for cities as well, to kind of capture the commitments from the federal government. I think there's ways to probably pull down new investment, but also just get ready from an infrastructure perspective, most specifically, of how to handle the increase in adoption there.
So there's a bunch of questions here, but really just want to open it up and, kind of be informal. Jessica, I see you nodding, and I know you're the master ringleader of the Q&A. So I'll back off and let you get in there.
No, I was just to give you agreement support. But yeah, I think I know that we've gotten to answer some questions in the Q and in the chat, but if you haven't had your question answered yet, or you had something new, feel free to take yourself off mute. Our goal is to build this as a stronger community too, as well. And so having people be able to dialogue with each other. So.
Hi, this is Joe Murphy. Never one to be shy, being a Boston Irish Catholic guy. Hi, everybody. Kudos for a great job, everybody. My question is that when you're doing something the size and magnitude and impact of what you did with transportation, it strikes me that a lot of infrastructure was built that other parts of the city and people can use. For example, public safety, because you've got the infrastructure, that there's a consideration there. Can you talk to extensions or other things that people are looking at that might be able to sit on top of that great infrastructure you built, either in Austin or Columbus?
Yeah, I mean, public health is the one that comes to mind first and foremost. I think just obviously it's top of mind for every community, but I think what's changing with transportation amidst COVID, and I think we all have to be very real about this, is the realities of working from home and the shift in transportation planning, that we plan so far in advance, and then construction and everything are these long-term commitments and investments that we're making in capital budgets. And then we have a dramatic event like today, and we're planning for a scenario in a future that's very uncertain. So will we ever return to 45,000 people in our downtown working Monday through Friday? Probably not. What does that mean? Do our downtown buildings become condos rather than office towers? So I think we are kind of grappling with what that future looks like, and what now builds off of where people are and where people are going. So before, commuting patterns and going to places was a critical artery of how a city functions. I think there's this new evolved thinking of these like 15-minute kind of cities, or these nodes, right? Where we've always wanted more walkable cities, but increasingly we become living in a place and we want, a few key assets there. But I think about healthcare being a primary use case for transportation that we were seeking to solve for. Really specifically, one of the projects I didn't get to talk about was a Medicaid program where we were trying to provide on-demand rides for women on Medicaid who were pregnant or had a child within 1 years old. And we were providing them on-demand trips to healthcare appointments. And what we've found in the pandemic is we're actually now providing them free internet and connected devices, and they're doing their telehealth appointments at home. So we're actually reducing the need for them to use transportation. And I think that's an interesting way to think about the mobility of the future of the community. How much can we bring to people versus building a transportation ecosystem that gets people to something else? So like, how do we bring food from the food bank to residents? That's one of the things with the farm. Like, how do we ensure they can get healthcare from home? All of those kind of components I think are really compelling to be thinking about how we build a city off of where people want to be. The other aspect I think we've really learned about a lot in this pandemic around inequity. One of the things I've been spending a lot of time thinking about is what I believe is this just digital redlining that has occurred in the past several decades. And really without a lot, while it's been acknowledged, it really hasn't been as clear as it is right now, and how debilitating the lack of access to the internet can be for someone's ability to navigate in today's world. But yet people are hacking their way around it, whether it's phones that are connected to the internet and the like. And we are designing social systems assuming that people don't have access to the internet. And by doing that, we've created really exceptional daily hurdles for people to do the basic things that we all take for granted, whether that's some of us pay for grocery delivery, or we've streamlined and given ourselves an hour back to be at work or to be with our family by getting things accessed online, that we've not designed the social safety net to provide that same dignified, time-saving like experience for our lowest income residents. So being poor is hard, being poor is time consuming. And yet we've not designed a system for the 21st century world with the advantages of technology. So I think that's another big opportunity, and I believe transportation has really been a leader in that, as we've seen transportation systems go to mobile payments. We're going to contactless payment, mobile routing. We've shown how these things can bring convenience to people's lives. Now I think we should start to see an integration across that, right? Like what happens if there were, food bank lockers at the Linden Transit Hub, where their food from the food bank is at the transit stop and they know when they're getting off, right? Like, how do we start to integrate convenience around life and dignity around the transportation system as well?
Yeah, and I'd argue that it's very difficult for communities to do that without entities like Smart Columbus and without Dallas Innovation Alliance and Austin Smart Cities Alliance, these kind of third party groups that bring all of those different sectors together. So I totally love your work in doing that. There's one question here that's a bit more of a technical question from Max Thibodeau. Good Cajun name, love that. So did you consider using open APIs that were made available by Waze to municipal governments? And perhaps it's Waze, perhaps there's other data sources you can think about too. He said, my understanding is that this would allow real-time information to flow in from the community. What was your experience with kind of integrating private sector data sets? I know it's a sticky area. So
yeah, sticky is a good word for it. So Waze does partner with the Transportation Management Center here. The operating system does ingest real-time data. It doesn't have as much of the resident crowdsourced data. One of the aspirations for the Waze partnership was actually that we could integrate all the streamline the street permitting process. Yeah. And then actually feed Waze with that information in real time, not the other way around. And that has had a variety of challenges. Mm-hmm. So in that existing example of Waze, I think it's more that we got in the way, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. Which is fine. We do ingest in the operating system in the back end INRIX data, which essentially is very, very, very similar. And so there is that real-time data feed, and that's paid for by the state of Ohio. So it just ended up working out economically, like that's the way that the city went. But I do think it's a great example of how we're asking the private sector to provide insight and like solutions for challenges that we've created. And I don't work for the city, so it's easy for me to say that. And I know that the way of solving that problem from the city is very complicated. There's 3 different departments. They each permit streets in very different ways, and we're on a timeline to do that, but it's just not quick. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Mr. Thibodeau, does that answer your question?
Yes, that's a good example. That's good insight into kind of working with those. And you mentioned INRIC. Is that ENRIC? Is that some kind of acronym, or is that something that is an industry standard?
INRIC. It's it's a data platform. I mean, they're funneling in all types of analytics about real-time traffic and road use data. They have their data in a lot of different vehicles that are traversing regularly. Yeah.
Great. I wanted to call up Mike Mosenter. Thanks for posing your question. He said, if your funding had been more flexible, would you have changed the mix of demonstration projects you engaged in over the last couple of years? And if so, what projects would you have focused on if you didn't have to really, kind of look at fulfilling the requirements of the grant?
So I'm speaking for myself, not the city of Columbus, on this. So I would hate for them to ever be stated of any sort of these opinions. But I think that the trip planning application, I would have recommended we probably sunset or evolve that project. I think the private sector is moving so fast. We've seen Google introduce transit lines in the United States into their app. We've seen a lot of open source of where scooters are located now in a lot of apps. And so you just can't compete where users are. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I learned early on when I got to study Barcelona a bit early on in the process, and they were really heralded as the world's smart city. And they had a lot of apps like, resident, tell us when there's trash overflowing in this park. And then we'll evolve it. And then they have all these different apps that make the city really digital. But when I asked them how many residents were using it, they were like in the hundreds. I mean, so I think one of the big questions that's still on my mind is, are cities supposed to be the developing end user apps and products? Like, is the user acquisition muscle really going to be behind these products? The USDOT wanted to use only 10% of the budget to marketing. Okay, that is like not even going to compete with any private sector solution in the market that's attracting a user, right? So these are the types of, if you want to create a dominant open source integrated solution and really create that carrot and stick to have the user, the resident, be the leverage point to negotiate with the private sector, the public sector has to be willing to do user acquisition that really helps it dominate the market and get the adoption. And I don't know, I have not seen a community do that or a city do that well. I think we equally came under the same challenges. And so I think that that's a good kind of indication for me. I think one of the other things that I probably would have loved to see more of was, I think, some embrace of scooters. So scooters happened after the grant agreements were all agreed to. And so they kind of came as an afterthought. So we were able to, outside the grant, like we're not even reporting to USDOT that we have put these like agnostic scooter charging stations at the Smart Mobility Hub because they didn't approve it. But we were able to get the company to do it. But that's the future, right? Like people want to ride on a scooter. So like, how do we incorporate where the market is and like constantly iterate and include those types of things? So those are just other pain points in my opinion.
Yeah, well, maybe you can talk a little bit about, because I share this story all the time about how y'all do community engagement, and I see behind you virtually, of course, the showroom. And I just love that idea of how you created that, invited the community in, how you staffed it. Could you give that as a use case?
Yeah, so we, on the private side, which is the side I had been predominantly focused on prior to this, we raised funding to really build out the program around the grant projects. And so we've invested in very incremental kind of engagement platforms with the community. So we did Smart Columbus Live, which were these 2-hour workshops 3 times on a Tuesday for 9 months, where we tried to get as many people as possible to really like soak up where the future is going, understand these trends and how transportation was changing and the opportunity that Columbus had to really capitalize on it. We then, from that, opened this experience center that's showed behind me. This is in the center of downtown. It's on the ground floor, which was really intentional and important because we wanted it to be accessible to all residents. So it's right in the center of like the festival pathway. So when, you know, we have 100,000 people that come downtown for different festivals, this space was open. They could come learn about electric vehicles. They could come learn about autonomous technology, drones, like all different types of future forward tech and its application to civic life. But then this was also our showroom for different companies that we had in town, different delegations that we've had in town, yada, yada, yada. And then so those were kind of like the broader mass awareness programs. We also did a ride and drive program for electric vehicles that we also took a broader narrative of the future of mobility alongside that. And we did 120 of those events in 3 years. So about 12,000 residents actually got into a vehicle, but we exposed, you know, countless individuals annually to those types of narratives. And then we like deepened the funnel. So we did a lot with the end users of the different products and projects, specifically in the Linden neighborhood that I referenced before, really engaging them to define, you know, the priorities for the autonomous vehicle route is a great example. We actually hired liaisons, like individuals in the neighborhood to be liaisons and kind of ears on the ground for us, and bringing residents into the engineering process. So there was a lot of intention there. I would say for us, one of the big things that we are looking to evolve in this next chapter is how we engage residents and lift up and create space for residents to be a part of the process. So we established kind of a grassroots crowdsourced innovation platform that we've called Can't Stop Columbus. And this was amidst the pandemic. We created this, and we had about 1,700 registered volunteers enlist in the platform that we've been managing totally digitally, completely all virtual, and just building kind of volunteer teams to work on civic tech projects. So we've organized about 62 different projects at this point in time. Everything from helping like a Dress for Success nonprofit bring their suiting process virtually to you know, helping actually get eviction notices out to people in different ways on social media. So things like that I think are helping the community become more digitally mature is the hope, but also think differently about how we're solving problems. And then the second component of that is embracing human-centered design. So we really have become a believer of that over the past 3 years. It works best when you don't have a predetermined project at the beginning. So that's where I think there's more of an opportunity in the future with community-led, like the community-driven approach, is that prior to subscribing and just checking in with residents if we got the answer right to how we're solving the problem, actually really focusing more on understanding the problem and co-designing the solution together, and then iterating through the implementation with feedback. So that's a process we really believe in as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. I just really appreciate how you all have focused on, yes, the high level, very futuristic things, you know, autonomous vehicles and all the things, but also meeting the needs of the community in real time. And I think we could probably keep going through this conversation, but we just ran out of time. We got like 30 seconds left. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to Jessica and to Jay for always providing the structure for this. Please tune in for our future talks. The one with Ruth B coming up in 2 weeks is going to be awesome. She is just a wealth of information, as is Jordan, of course. And I'm really looking forward to taking all of these together and having like a big learning session. So thanks everyone. Again, hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Jordan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Austin.
you sharing everything you've
Thanks,
learned.
Jordan.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks,
Thank you,
Chelsea.
Jordan.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
See you
Thanks,
all.
Jordan.
See you.
Good luck. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, y'all.